to prime time. We are having a day that this president will not want to remember, and it is one that we can never forget. The man charged with keeping our country safe, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, is out. Not retiring, as the president claims. He quit in protest of the President of the United States. A four-star general is here to help make sense of the moves. Mattis' exit comes on a day of epic uncertainty. The president blowing up the deal to keep the government open, insisting on the wall in a House vote when many in the Senate have already left. Border politics boiling over today. Did you see Democrat Luis Gutierrez storm out of a House hearing? He called the DHS secretary a remorseless liar to her face. He's here. And so is the one Republican Trump supporter in Congress that I could get to come on. Has Matt Gaetz gotten a wake-up call about this presidency? The time is now, my friends. Let's get after it. You know, no less than Republican Senator Bob Corker once said, there were three men separating our country from chaos: Rex Tillerson, John Kelly, and James Mattis. All three gone or going. Just think about the last 36 hours. Early yesterday morning, in a surprise to his own State Department and the Pentagon, the president decided alone to pull our troops out of Syria, falsely declaring the war against ISIS there won. The only person happy about the decision? Vladimir Putin. Republicans raked their president over the coals.
I think we're going to pay a price for it if it's not reversed.
It's hard to imagine that any president would wake up and make this kind of decision with this little communication, with this little preparation.
To say they're defeated is an overstatement and is fake news.
And that was just the beginning. Later yesterday morning, the president seemed to choose workers over that imaginary wall and backed out of the shutdown. But then he reversed course today, really catching senators in the lurch. And in this moment of crisis, who makes the case to the country about ending two major military actions, a shutdown looming over Christmas, and a border crisis? This guy.
Right now, as we speak, there is a surge of illegal immigration heading towards our country that presents a national crisis now. Not a month from now, not a year from now, right now.
On a day like this, you send out the man who is the metaphor for what people question about your judgment? Thank God the markets were closed by then. By 4 p.m. Eastern, another 464 points were knocked off the Dow. The NASDAQ down some 20% below its highest ever point in August, flirting with bear market territory now. Then came 5:21 p.m. Eastern, the gut punch, the real wall, the man who stood between the president and his petulance, resigned out of protest. How did it go down? Well, we hear General James Mattis went to the White House to discuss his concerns about Syria, literally saying to the president, you have to listen to me. You can't do this. But he was unable. And in that moment, he decided, this is as good as it gets. He left. He put out a scathing letter, a total rebuke of the president's worldview, saying in part, quote, my views on treating allies with respect and also being clear-eyed about both malign actors and strategic competitors are strongly held and informed by over 4 decades of immersion in these issues. Because you have the right to have a Secretary of Defense whose views are better aligned with yours on these and other subjects, I believe it is right for me to step down from my position. CNN learned late this evening that once again this president will double down on a controversial decision. The U.S. military has also been ordered to withdraw half the troops in Afghanistan. If your head's not spinning, you're not listening. I want to bring in General Wesley Clark and Phil Mudd. Thanks, both of you gentlemen, for tonight. We need to steady the ship. General, give me a sense of the proportion of what's going on in our government right now.
Well, I think this is a really dangerous time for the U.S. government because it's Christmas holidays. You've got a lot of snap decisions being made by a president who is famous for snap decisions. These are very consequential decisions. He's under tremendous pressure, obviously, from the Mueller investigation. The rumors coming out of the Middle East are astonishing when you listen to them, that he's looking for a way out, that he's taken huge bribes from foreign countries, and that Mueller has some or all of this in the works, and that his children are in danger. So, I mean, Trump's head is spinning. You have to look at these decisions as not only dangerous in themselves, but probably part of his bargaining strategy for how he wants to exit the U.S. government. and try to avoid impeachment or criminal indictment for himself and his family.
Well, keeping
so
it,
this is
General,
a really dangerous time.
keeping it to the specifics of the impact of the military moves, the idea of the war being over in ISIS, the idea of pulling out half the troops in Afghanistan, what's the risk and the reality?
Well, the war isn't over in ISIS, and you've handed the field to Russia and the Iranians, which is odd considering that President Trump has been so hard on the Iranians. So that's clearly a bad move. In Afghanistan, we've never put the resources in there from the beginning to try to really work that mission. I don't know who's coming out. We'd have to look at what the structure is. How much can you do with half the troops gone? You can still do something. I always felt that Vice President Biden's plan was a workable idea. Back in 2009, we went the other way with trying to reinforce it, but we never put enough troops in to really do the job. So the Afghanistan's a question mark, but I do think that Secretary Mattis did the right thing for himself and for the country. He's been disempowered by having been ignored and his advice ignored by the president. And so he can't be effective in that role. He can't be effective with allies. He can't be effective with the White House. And so he's doing the smart thing and the right thing. I know it's upsetting for the country, but the country has to face the consequences of the election of 2016 and deal with the reality of the man that's in the White House.
All right, so let me bring Phil in here. Let me read another excerpt of the letter and get your take on whether or not you agree with the general that this might be a little frightening in the moment, but somehow might be cleansing overall. One core belief I've always held is that our strength as a nation is inextricably linked to the strength of our unique and comprehensive system of alliances and partnerships. While the U.S. remains the indispensable nation in the free world, we cannot protect our interests or serve that role effectively without maintaining strong alliances and showing respect to those allies. It's a pretty thinly veiled message to a president who's been treating his allies rougher than his enemies. Phil, your takeaway.
This is not too thinly veiled if you're in the business I'm in. This is a message to the president that says, I'm out and you're dead wrong. Look at the three basic pieces of that letter. Number one, you just mentioned on alliances. World War I, World War II, ancient history. How about Afghanistan? How about Iraq? How we counter with NATO Russian activities in places like eastern Ukraine and Crimea? The president went out of his way publicly to embarrass NATO. So I think if you look at NATO and the alliances as historical, they're not. We used them in places like after 9/11 in Afghanistan, and we might use them in the future against Russia. Two quick comments in addition to that, Chris. The former Secretary of Defense, or soon-to-be former Secretary of Defense, also said, forget about our allies, what about our adversaries? I also disagree with you about how you deal with potential adversaries, including China and Russia. Final thing in that letter, find me the sentence in that letter where the former four-star general tells his commander-in-chief, I appreciate the opportunity to serve you personally, the President of the United States. He doesn't say it. That letter's tough.
Let me ask you something. The Democrats, they want to get out of Syria. They want to get out of Afghanistan. One of the big surprises in Barack Obama's election was that, he ran on getting out of Iraq and then he went into Afghanistan. How do you think this plays with them, or how should it?
Well, I think we're asking two different questions. Should we get out of these places eventually? We've been at war in Afghanistan for 18 years. My question would be yes. Let's talk about style for a moment. Transgender policy in the Pentagon, exercises with the North Koreans, retreating potentially from Syria and Afghanistan. Can you explain to me what the process was to coordinate with the Secretary of Defense and the National Security Council about how to talk to people like the Turks, the Jordanians, our Kurdish allies in the Syrian fight? I think part of the question here, and I can't speak for the Secretary of Defense, part of the question here is not just what we're doing, but how do we do policy by tweet? How do we coordinate this? That's what I would ask.
I'll tell you what, General Mattis reportedly was not in favor of that big meet and greet with Kim Jong-un. He said, this isn't the way you got these guys to do anything. And sure enough, just today, they said, we're not giving up anything until the threat is gone. Literally, you're back to where you started there. So the big concern is security. Are we going to be okay? Kelly's gone, McMaster's gone, Flynn is gone, all the people that the president pointed to, and now Mattis saying, look at all the generals I have around me. We'll be fine. Don't worry about anything. Well, now what?
Yeah, we're in a new world here. But Mattis is not gone for another 6 or 8 weeks. So the Congress has its say. And and we've got to come to terms with the character of the president and how he makes decisions. And Congress has to assert itself. The Democratic leadership in the House will assert itself. Will the Republican leadership in the Senate assert itself?
That's the big question,
because this
General.
is a time.
That's
this
the big
is where
question.
We need help.
They have been sitting back and watching. You know, even on the House side, you had Paul Ryan. You know, people had such great ambitions for him. He said yesterday, "I always remained myself," and that's my tip to everybody else. No, he didn't. He sat back and he watched this president do things that he used to call out. Even in President Obama, he called them out, and he's not alone. Do you think this is a tipping point? Do you believe that Republican men and women of goodwill who raised their hand and took an oath are going to step up?
Well, I think it's the start of the tipping point. I mean, it's really two things. It's the behavior of the president, and then it's the information that's continuing to leak out through court indictments and hearings and other things like this. So President Trump is being slammed from both directions here, and he's fighting back, and this is his nature. But this is the time that especially the United States Senate has to step up to its responsibilities.
Well, with all due respect to you both, if he were a real fighter, he'd be where you are right now. He'd be addressing the American people. He'd be going through the media, and he'd be saying, hold on, everything's fine. Let me tell you why I did what I did and how it fits in and what it means. I am your president. I will reassure you. He did the opposite today, Phil. He put out that guy today who's part of, you know, a real extreme part of Trumpism. And he showed why today. Instead of doing it himself and owning this situation, he put out a proxy who's not his best foot forward. So the question becomes, the stock markets, border politics coming over, you may have a shutdown over Christmas. Now you have these military moves. Do you believe that this is bottom for this presidency, Phil?
I do not. When I'm looking at the congressional response today, including the congressional response on issues like funding for the border wall, you still see this evening how many people are out, especially from House Republicans, saying, I disagree with the president giving us a bunch of sort of moving around on the issue of how we're going to fund the government. I see very little response over the past 2 years from congressional Republicans on everything from the president lying to us on Air Force One about how he funded a pole dancer for $130,000. Clearly he lied, to whether we were safe in North Korea. I don't care about what he did in terms of his payment to somebody he had a relationship with. I care about moving forward. Are congressional Republicans going to say his judgment is appropriate when we deal with issues like North Korea and Iran? And the answer is they're not going to do it.
Right. So despite his best efforts, the government and its institutions are bigger than any one branch, even the presidency. But it is interesting to see whether or not this will be the moment that you heard men and women on both sides say, quiet, no more. General, thank you so much. Phil Mudd, appreciate your perspective. As always, it's a very important night to have you both. All right, we have much more on what this Mattis exit and the troop exit from two major theaters means for our collective safety. And also, the border war is raging, and there is no solution in sight. The lawmaker who called the DH secretary a liar to her face is here to tell you why. Next.
That separates children and allows them to stay at the other side of the border, fearing death, fearing hunger, fearing sickness. Shame on us for wearing our badge of Christianity during Christmas and allow the secretary to come here and lie.
Calling me a liar are fighting words. I'm not a liar. A policy of family separation would mean that any family that I encountered in the interior, I would separate. It would mean that any family that I found at a port of entry, I would separate. It would mean that every single family that I found illegally crossing, we would separate. We did none of those. What we did do is uphold the laws that Congress has passed, and we prosecuted those who choose to come here illegally.
That's not a time lapse. That was Congressman Louis Gutierrez walking out on Nielsen, and he joins me now. Welcome to Primetime, Congressman.
Pleasure to be with you tonight, Chris.
All right, let's deal with the urgency, and then we'll get into the context of the overall political plan. So the president says, forget what I said. I'm not going to have a CR if there's no wall attached to it. The House gives him the vote. You have the Freedom Caucus come strong on that. The Senate side, a lot of them are gone. So where do things stand? Is there going to be a shutdown or not?
I believe there is going to be a government shutdown. I think it's unfortunate and totally unnecessary. The Senate made a proposal, and let's remember, the Senate is controlled by the Republicans, and we were ready to work. Democrats were ready to bite the bullet today. We might not have been happy with the total context of the bill, coming over, but we were ready to keep the government open. I think it's kind of sad, Chris, that you have members of the Republican Party in the House saying, well, you know, those government employees, it comes with the territory when they take a government job that they should expect to be on furlough from time to time when the government closes. Yeah, well, Mr. Congressman, Lady Congresswoman, you get your check. You're going to have a wonderful Christmas. And guess what? You're going to have your health care. You know, again, the callousness with which we treat our fellow Americans is really repugnant.
So, Louis, what's the brass tacks here, though? Like, you know, what could
Here's
you,
what I
what
believe,
would you
what
have
I
to
believe
give?
is going to
What
happen.
would you have to give to get it done?
Look, we already said that they could have a couple of $1 billion in border enforcement, right? Smart border enforcement. Border enforcement that's really going to help keep America safe. Everybody knows you can't use the technology from the Chinese in order to get a solution today. So look, it's old technology. Let's use modern technology, right? Let's use smart technology. So we are putting on the table $2 billion for border security so that we can continue to protect.
And what do they want?
They want a wall. And I just want to say this to Chris, because we've been on the program before talking. Do you remember the hostage taking of the Dreamers? And the Democrats' response was $5 billion?
Right.
And then they increased, and so we said, what do we do with the kidnappers of our Dreamers? What is the ransom? Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Dick Durbin, progressive Democrats went and offered this president $25 billion. And what did he say? No, because it isn't about the wall. It's about destroying our immigration system. It's about destroying and stopping this of being a nation, a welcoming nation. They want to destroy immigration as we've known it, the foundation of America. That's what they want to destroy. And until they destroy it, they will not be happy. The wall is simply one element, one symptom.
So what got you going today was the secretary proposed a plan where you can come here and apply for asylum, but you will stay in Mexico pending the review of the application. The policy judgment being there, if they get inside this country, there's going to be an attrition rate. Catch and release is what it's called colloquially, that you're not going to be able to find these people again. Why don't you like that solution?
Look, we have asylum laws. We have refugee laws. Those are the laws of our nation. Those are the laws well established. And I think that this new criteria being proposed of saying to people fleeing violence, death, gangs, murder, God, why should they have to wait on the other side of the border when they can be victimized once again, when there are thousands? You know what we're going to have there? You're going to have illness, right? You're going to have more murder, more rape, more harm coming to people that are fleeing. And so I guess today, Chris, you know, look, I'm a Catholic, right? So, you know, I went to my first communion, my confirmation. Maybe they didn't religiously, you know, teach us the Bible all of the time. But, you know, there was something fundamental. It's Christian. Is they keep saying, oh, don't say Happy Holidays, say Merry Christmas, because they want to emphasize their Christianity.
But you have reason.
It's Christmas.
But Louis,
it's
look,
Christmas.
I hear you. I get the idea of what the spirit of the season is, the reason for the season. I
Yes.
get it. But, you know, compassion can also have an integrity to it. And the laws have enabled something that we've never seen before. These mass caravans are being organized by some good people, some bad people. And they are telling people, go there with your kids, you'll get in. Go in big groups and you'll get in. Our system cannot handle the flow. The rules have to change to enable people to be able to treat others humanely. They can't do it right now. That's what that little girl's death tells you. All my reporting does not suggest that the Border Patrol did anything wrong to her. But the system did. They can't handle the flow. You got to do something, Louis.
Yeah, but Chris, understand something. So what does the richest, most powerful nation in the world do? With the resources and the abundance that we have, what do? We say only 100 people can come at each of the point of entry. You're really telling me that that's the capacity of the United States of America? That that's our humanity?
Got a backlog of
that's
years. You got people signing those Fugazi books that don't promise them anything. It's bad down there.
I disagree with you respectfully. There are people there, and it is part of a process that has been engineered to make the crossing of the... Okay, Chris, when are we going to deal with the fact that the debilitation of Honduras, El Salvador, right, Guatemala, is directly linked with the consumption of illegal drugs in the United States? that we here in the United States, through our consumption of those, debilitate those economies. Shouldn't we be working on both sides of the border in order to establish countries in which, look, Chris, you know what it is here? Everybody thinks you dial 911, you know, in Chicago, it might take 20 minutes.
You guys
Somebody's going to show up.
You should be taking on all this stuff.
So that is the kind of comprehensive plan that we need to engage in. We can open up offices in each one of those countries at our embassy and say, if you fear and you have an asylum case you'd like to bring it to us and prepare it and bring it to us. But
bring it there.
You can do it. You can
change the rule.
We can put the kinds of outposts. We can say to the government of Mexico, listen, we're going to help you because this is the United States of America, and we're going to put a place where people can be treated humanely. I'm sorry, Chris, but they keep telling us, oh, stop saying happy holidays, it's Merry Christmas. And then during the Christmas season, what would have been a baby Jesus if we had built a wall and he couldn't have flee Bethlehem and flee
the moral
to Egypt?
imperative, Louis, is action. You can have the spirit of Christmas in your heart, but you guys have to come together and do more than just fight about it, Louis, because kids are dying.
But that's what you're saying, that we're fighting about it. What we have done, you know this better than most, the Speaker of the House was a chief proponent of comprehensive immigration reform. Paul Ryan was a chief proponent. He came to Chicago with me, stood with me at the City Club to say we need a comprehensive. He signed under the bill that I introduced in 2004. And then he becomes speaker and he says, here's my promise to you, my nation of America, not to end hunger, not to end unemployment, not to end poverty. I promise you I will never bring up a solution to our immigration issue. That is what they are doing. And then we have a president that starts his campaign.
You got the ball now, though, Louis.
We do, you know something? And we are going to use it. And we are going to use it constructively. It's sad that we have lost the John McCains. It's really sad. And you know what? I still remember working with President Bush, the son. I remember working with him and bringing down his secretary. That does not exist anymore.
Well, it's got to. That's what I hope today means to you guys.
Ronald Reagan in 1984 was the pro-immigrant force. What's happened to this Republican Party? They have used immigrants as a scapegoat and a tool for their own political gains, and that is unfortunate.
All right, well, we're going to stay on it. I wish you the best for Christmas.
Thank you.
And I hope everybody remembers the reason for the season. Be well. God bless. Congressman Louis Gutierrez. Thank you. All right, now, I keep asking, is this bottom for the president? Everybody tells me no, by the way. General Wesley Clark said, wait until Russia enters Ukraine. If that happens, then you've got a big shoe to drop. All right, so we know where we are. We know it's not good. The question is, where do we go from here? How do we get the cooperation that Louis was just talking about? That's the start for the great debate. Next. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says this: I believe it is essential that the United States maintain and strengthen the post-World War II alliances that have been carefully built by leaders in both parties. We must also maintain a clear-eyed understanding of our friends and foes and recognize that nations like Russia are among the latter. So I was sorry to learn that Secretary Mattis, who shares those principles, will soon depart the administration. But I'm particularly distressed that he's resigning due to sharp differences with the president, and on these and other key aspects of America's global leadership, it's regrettable. And then he goes on to say, you got to pick someone else. And when he does pick someone else, hopefully the guy's like Mattis. All right, so there is Senate Majority Leader McConnell weighing in. This is pretty stiff language for him. He has been at the head of the standby parade when it comes to watching what President Trump does. This was a little different. Let's debate where we are and where we're going to go. Paul Begala, Mike Shields. Thanks to both. Mike, is this a low moment for you guys on the right? Seeing the fruits of disruption. You know, the hope was that Trump being disruptive would help shake up the system and bring about something better. What's going on with this potential shutdown over Christmas? What's happening with withdrawing the troops this way? What's happening with the markets? You can't be happy.
Yeah, you know, I think what you're seeing is people that have followed the president would tell you that there's a lot of issues that are not top of the list for him. Healthcare, taxes are not the things that he's really talked about for years. What he ran on and what he really deeply believes, what he and Steve Bannon worked together on and what they both believed was changing our trade policy, changing our immigration policy, and changing our policy overseas. And they knew that they wouldn't be able to do it without there being massive disruption and some people saying it's chaos. I think they expected this, and I think what you're seeing is the president finally getting to the point in his presidency where he's sort of like, look, I'm going to carry out the policies that I ran on, And I don't really care how much chaos you think there is. That's what's going to happen when you're changing things. And so that's not even necessarily a Republican or a Democrat thing, right? Like there's Republicans that are more for involvement in the Middle East. It was Barack Obama who ran for president on bring all of our troops home, end all the wars. And so that's not even necessarily a Republican or Democrat thing. That is a populist, nationalist presidency that is finally doing the things that he always said he was going to do. And we're seeing the consequences of what he is keeping his promises on.
So it's all going according to plan. Bagala, you okay with that?
God, I wish. I mean, it sleeps so much better if I could believe that the president had a strategy at all, even a strategy I disagreed with. This is a guy who runs on impulse and grievance and whatever he saw this morning on Fox and Friends. The government is about to shut down because the president, who a day or two ago said he was okay with continuing the current funding until February 8th, now all of a sudden has flip-flopped on that. It's the chaos that causes these crises, and it's not that he has a strategy. I wish he did, Mike. I think he has impulses and he has grievances, and he's acting on them. And the notion that he has those grievances against men like General Mattis is particularly upsetting. I was happy to see Senator McConnell stand up on his hind legs, a guy who's heretofore shown no spine, as if he didn't run a co-equal branch of the government. But maybe this is a bit of a turning point. You know, you have there's the Mueller investigation looming. You have the government about to shut down. You have the stock market really dropping dismally in the last 5 sessions, and the government's going to shut down. Now maybe you'll see Republicans on the Hill begin a check and a balance on this unchecked and unbalanced president.
We've never seen a resignation like this way for these reasons, Mike. What does it mean to you?
Well, look, I share the concerns because I'm an Air Force brat. I have a tremendous amount of respect for General Mattis. I think that he served the president well. I think if the president brings in someone like Mattis, it'll calm everybody down and make them not as worried about it. But I do also believe there's a difference in policy here. And the policy difference is that General Mattis and people like Marco Rubio and Mitch McConnell and lots of Republicans are more in favor of our alliances overseas. And there is a populist sort of movement in the country that President Trump represents that says that we should disentangle ourselves from those alliances and focus on spending that money at home. There's actually plenty of Democrats as well as Republicans at the populist level that agree with that.
What I don't like is I don't like that Mattis and McConnell both took time to mention Russia in their letters and that they don't think the president gets it about Russia. That's always been the central question, Paul. And now to hear someone like McConnell bring it up, because today had nothing to do with Russia other than Putin liking us getting out of Syria and that being a strategic advantage for him. But they both went out of their way to mention the president's obvious point of disagreement with them on Russia.
And Russia is a threat. You know, way back, I owe this to our audience. In 2012, Mitt Romney said Russia was our greatest geostrategic threat. Barack Obama
Guys laughed
mocked
at
him for that.
Yep.
I jumped on his back as well. I was wrong. Mitt was right. He's coming into the Senate, and I hope he continues his focus on Russia. But what you're seeing today is Vladimir Putin gloating. Now, Vladimir Putin's economy is a tenth the size of ours. His military is a tenth the size and strength of ours.
And a lot of it's lined up on the border of Ukraine right now.
Yes, it is, but he is running us around the post. I'm not wise enough to know what we should do in Syria, okay? But I look and I see that Israel is angry and Russia is happy, and I start to think, I'd much rather be allied with Israel than Russia. Israel is our ally. They're a democracy. They share our values. Russia is none of those things, and yet that suggests to me that this very impulsive policy is really bad.
Let's not get too carried away, and I think it's why it's really important to see who does come in to lead the Defense Department, because the policies of this administration have been stronger against Russia than Obama's policies against Russia. We armed Ukraine. We have armed Ukraine to fight them with weapons, deadly weapons, which Russia really didn't want, whereas Biden said to the Russians, said to the Ukrainians, come into Crimea, don't fight. We've put sanctions on the Russians. We kicked out all their diplomats when they poisoned someone in London. So there has been a pretty harsh, sort of policy agenda to push back on Russia that doesn't, it's not the same as the rhetoric that we hear. And a lot of that has come possibly from the Defense Department. And it would be very interesting to see how much you have a strong anti-Russia person put in charge now that matters.
Here's the problem with the argument.
Sanctions.
Yeah, he dropped the sanctions
on Russian oligarch.
Right. He dropped some sanctions yesterday. He was forced to do the sanctions by Congress. He didn't want to. He complained about it privately and publicly. And he will not say a negative word about Vladimir Putin when
Well,
the
I mean,
guy
look-
insults everybody else on the face of the planet?
I've been on the air and said I disagreed with the tone and the rhetoric of the Helsinki conference, but I focus on the press conference, but I focus on the policy. The policy has been much more aggressively anti-Russian than Barack Obama's policy was, where he did a
Not
reset
leaving
and Hillary
Syria.
Clinton went and pushed
How's
the
leaving
reset button
Syria
the
tough
stage
on
with it.
Russia?
I'm sorry?
How's leaving Syria being tough on Russia?
Yeah,
You're
look,
giving them the
I don't
playing
agree
field.
with. I don't agree. Look, I don't agree with it. I think that the president's been successful in Syria up to this point. That's what's kind of amazing about this. He has done things again. We bombed a portion of Syria directly against the wishes of the Russians. And we went right against them and carried out the mission anyway. We have put troops on the ground in Russia. We did bomb in Syria. We bombed the Syrians when they used chemical weapons, which President Obama would not do when they crossed the red line. So up until this point, he's been very strong in his Syria policy, and I think that's the right policy.
So you don't see this, Mike, as a bottom. You don't see this as a point where your party's going to have to make a judgment about what it is and what it isn't.
What I'm trying to say is, if you sit back and look at this analytically, there is a movement of people that have a populist nationalist agenda, and they elected the president to carry out that agenda, and they always knew that people like us would be on here saying this is chaos and it's crazy and why is this happening? Because that's exactly what they wanted to see happen. They wanted the system of the way things were done on trade, immigration, and foreign, in putting our military overseas to be blown up, to be changed, to be done differently. And the president is carrying out exactly what he ran on.
Well,
That's what he's doing.
choices create opportunities, and they're going to fall right on your plate coming in January, Paul. So, there's a plus minus to that. You guys are coming into power at a good time in terms of having a table set with problems. We've got problems here. What you'll do about it, what choices you'll make, we'll see. What do you think the biggest ambition will be for Democrats?
Well, I think the very first bill they're going to introduce is on voting rights, and I think that's the most, and cleaning up the corruption. By the way, the president promised to drain the swamp. He just filled it with bigger, fatter, uglier alligators. I think reforming that system first to actually make it work for the middle class is really important. Then they're going to move to things like health care. The president says he wants to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. They've done nothing about it. I think Democrats should call his bluff on that. I think that what you're going to see is going to be really interesting, Mike. You're going to see the Democrats controlling the House passing bills that help the American middle class, that help them get to work easier, help them pay their prescription drug bills, help them pay their health insurance premium bills. And then they're going to kick it over to the Republicans. And they're either going to pass it or wish they had. The Democrats just won the biggest landslide in a midterm that they'd won in 40 years. And they won it because they ran on middle-class economic issues because Donald Trump betrayed that middle class. So many people who had faith in him have been conned by Don.
All right,
and
last
I think
word,
they're
Mike.
really angry about it. That's why my party won a landslide.
Here's what their agenda is. Investigate and impeach. And a lot of establishment Democrats, I believe, are naive. We've been through it in our party. They're just now starting to see what happens when the left wing of your base pushes you to a place that you can't go back from. And when you have presidential candidates in Iowa being asked, hey, what about this investigation? What should we do? They're not going to be able to avoid impeachment, and they're going to overplay their hand just like they did in the Kavanaugh hearings.
Well, we'll see.
This I know more about than Mike. Mike's pretty much smarter than me on everything. I actually know what the Democrats' plans are better than my Republican plans.
I think you do. I just think you guys might be naive. We've lived through.
And that is
we have
legislate
lived
for the
through the
middle
changes
class,
that you haven't
try to
lived
help
through yet.
working people in this country who Donald Trump has betrayed with all of his policies.
Well, look, you're both right in one way, right? Paul, you got to see which way you guys are going to evolve on this. Mike, you're saying that you guys have seen it. I don't know that you've lived through it. You got to figure out what you're doing right now, who you are, and how you move forward. That's going to be an equal challenge for both sides. Paul, Mike, best to you. If I don't hear from you before then, Merry Christmas to both of you and your families. Be well, brothers. All right. All kinds of chaos erupting in the season finale of the 2018 version of The Trump Show. Will his base continue to stand by him if he doesn't get the wall? Is it so important that it's worth risking everything? We'll see next.